go. It's another wrap up. I'm here today to wrap up all of my September reads. I read a total of 11 books in September. A lot of good ones and a couple that were not so great. So let's get into it. So the first book that I read in September was The Silk Road by Kathryn Davis. I really love Kathryn Davis. This is my second book from her. I read her memoir, Aurelia, which was incredibly beautiful and creative. It played with the timeline. It kind of was written in a way that kind of mimicked the way different thoughts and memories pop into your head. And I really loved it. And I think that The Silk Road was also really well written. However, I think that this book is a little bit out there for me. There was a chunk of time where I wasn't actually sure what was going on. So the premise says that the Silk Road begins on a mat in a yoga class, deep within a labyrinth on a settlement somewhere in the icy north, under the canny guidance of Ji-moon. When someone fails to arise from corpse pose, the astronomer, the archivist, the botanist, the keeper, the topologist, the geographer, the iceman, and the cook remember the paths that brought them there, paths on which they seem to still be traveling. So, and that's exactly how it opens. They're all on yoga mats. The yoga instructor tells them all to rise from corpse pose, and one of them doesn't get up. And it's kind of almost as similar to her memoir. She really plays with timeline in jumping around from present to past to individual character to character. But I will say it was a little confusing, and it's not that I think that the book was poorly written or that Kathryn Davis is not utilizing a certain tactic in her writing. I think it was more just, it was going over my head quite a bit. I couldn't really keep up as much as I wanted to. I think it's a book that should probably be reread to really get the full grasp of what she's doing in this novel. And I think what was the hardest about it was her jumping around from past to present into memories. I will say, and I don't think this is giving anything away, that from very early in the novel, it seems as if all of those characters that I described are siblings and grew up together. Now, I'm not sure if that means they were adopted separately or if they are, in fact, blood-related siblings. So it goes into their childhood a lot, talks about their parents. And there's also a lot in it where they're traveling through a different forest. I believe it's the forest outside of the labyrinth, but even that gets a little confusing because she talks about these certain roads and these certain landmarks, and it's just gets a little over my head. I wouldn't even say it's muddled or purposefully confusing, just I think it went a little over my head. So I would love to reread it, or I would love to talk to somebody who has read it. So if you've read this book, please let's chat, because I would love a better understanding of what's going on in here. Next, I read a collection of poetry by Louise Gluck, Meadowlands. This was wonderful. I loved it. I love Louise Gluck. I think her poetry is beautiful. This one weaves together contemporary marriage with the story of the Odyssey. So there are a lot of poems that center around love and lost love and a marriage ending. It's actually the dissolution of a marriage. So I really enjoyed the combination of the two, and I think there's a lot of poetry that interweaves Greek myth within the poems, and I always really enjoy that. Anne Carson does it really well, and I think Louise Gluck has another collection where she does that as well. So really enjoyed this. I thought it was beautiful. Next, I read Ongoingness, The End of a Diary by Sarah Manguso. This is another one I really enjoyed. It's really small. It's a short little guy, and most of the pages are not filled with text. But This is essentially, Sarah Manguso had been keeping a diary since I think she was in high school. So she had all of these volumes of diary entry collections, and she wanted to publish a book that represented those entries in all of those diaries. And while this isn't necessarily those exact entries word for word, she's kind of writing in a diary-like style of her thoughts that are representative of all of those years that she kept diaries. And I believe she still keeps diaries to this day. She talks a lot about her fear of forgetting things, and that's why she had always kept diaries throughout her entire life, is this need to record everything and write everything down so she doesn't forget. So she talks kind of over the span of her lifetime. She talks about being younger and growing up and falling in love and becoming a mother. So it really spans most of her life. And even though it's very few pages, I felt like she was able to accomplish a lot in this little book. So recommend it, and recommend Sarah Manguso in general. I also read 300 Arguments earlier this year and really enjoyed that as well. Next, I read Ali Smith's companion piece, which I loved. So far, I've loved everything I've read from Ali Smith, and I'm becoming a major Ali Smith stan. I really like her style of writing. It's very unique and consumable and easily digestible, but also really smart. So Companion Piece is a follow-up to her seasonal quartet, of which I finished this summer. I read Summer in August and completed the collection. And so as soon as I finished Summer, I just needed to read this and kind of complete the circle of that quartet. And this was written in the same style. It had more to do with modern day, a lot of pandemic content in here, but I think that Ali Smith did a really great job with it. I haven't read a ton of pandemic novels. For me, it just felt a little too soon. But this one I thought was really great and highly recommend it. Next, I read Anne Carson's If Not Winter, Fragments of Sappho. So she says on the back, Sappho lived on the islands of Lesbos from 630 BC. She was a musical genius who devoted her life to composing and performing songs. Of the 9 books of lyrics Sappho is said to have composed, none of the music is extant and only one poem has survived complete. All the rest are fragments. In If Not Winter, Carson presents all of Sappho's fragments in Greek and in English. So this, even though it looks like a thicker book, was actually a really short read. A lot of the pages had almost no text on it, and all of the text on this side is in Greek, so you're only reading this side of the page. So it went really quickly. I read it really fast, but I don't know if you can see that. There's a lot of dog ears. There were a lot of really beautiful lines in here. For example, arrows shook my mind like a mountain wind falling on oak trees. You came and I was crazy for you, and you cooled my mind that burned with longing, and with anger spreading in the chest to guard against a vainly barking tongue. So those are just a few examples. There were a bunch in here that were really great, and I thought this was a really interesting read, to read all these fragments of these lost lyrics from this apparently musical genius, and I thought it was really cool the way Anne Carson did it. Next, I read Kurt Vonnegut's God Bless You, Dr. Kevorkian. This was a very silly, funny little novel. Kurt Vonnegut started doing these little shorts for a New York radio station to raise money, and what he did was claim that he was having Dr. Kevorkian put him in these near-death states where he would then, in between life and death, meet some people who had died and interview them and ask them questions. And some of the people were people you aren't famous, you don't know, and then others were famous, like Hitler and Shakespeare. And it's just kind of humor, little shorts, and then they put them together into this book. And I thought they were all quite funny, but it was a short little read. So if you're looking for something light and funny just to pick up in between maybe heavier books, this is a good option. Next, Flight by Lynn, Steger. If you have seen my first vlog, you know how I feel about this book. I did not love it. I thought it was very Hallmark holiday movie-esque. The ending is kind of this wrapped in a bow, neat little ending, a little too happy ending for me. And I even felt that a lot of the characters felt kind of flat. There were some more interesting characters than others, but for the most part, I just didn't find it to be more than kind of a surface level story. So unfortunately, I did not really enjoy this, but I will say that it is a light holiday read if you want to read it around the holidays and between Thanksgiving and Christmas, just to kind of get in the mood. This is certainly an option, but can't say personally I recommend it. Next, I read Things We Lost in the Fire by Mariana Enriquez. I loved this collection of stories. I thought it was wonderfully creepy and haunting and chilling. And Mariana Enriquez has this way of writing where she can capture that horror aspect, but also integrate kind of a deeper story within that. And this one pertains to contemporary Argentinian life. So you really get a window into what it's like to live in Argentina and some of the political issues they have and the fear that comes with living in certain neighborhoods. And I think she captures that fear not only by integrating a ghost or a other evil entity, but also with very real stories with horrible things happening that are scary without any other influence coming in. So I thought this was wonderful. I also highly recommend The Dangers of Smoking in Bed, which she also wrote. Both story collections were really strong and I love them both. Next, I read I Hold a Wolf by the Ears by Laura Van Den Berg. I really enjoyed this collection, though reading it right after Things We Lost in the Fire, I think I enjoyed it less than I might have just on its own or after a novel. I do think these stories are still really strong. I think Laura Van Den Berg has an ability to really capture the worst of humanity and kind of the worst of people and the fear within that. How someone even you've been living with and know for years can turn out to be a different person or could turn out to make a decision that you never would have expected. So I think her stories are fearful in that way. There's certainly dark stories. These aren't cheery, happy stories. I did not enjoy it as much as Things We Lost in the Fire, which I did talk about in my last vlog when I read these books for Julie at Lynn and Librarian's Blurb Telephone. But I still really liked this collection and would recommend it. Next, I read Sigrid Nunez, Sempre Susan, a memoir of Susan Sontag. This was fantastic. It was so good. I really feel like you got such an insider look into who Susan Sontag was as a person. Sigrid Nunez wrote this memoir because when she was much younger, she was working for the New Yorker Review of Books, and they assigned her to assist Susan Sontag in answering some of the letters she's gotten and to help her with some of her writing. She became her assistant, and within the first few sessions of her working for her, she met her son David, and they started dating. And then eventually Sigrid Nunez moved in with both David and Susan, and so she did live with Susan for a period of time. And so she writes about that. She also writes about the experience of knowing Susan or communicating with Susan after her and David broke up and after she stopped working for her and living with her. And she writes it in such a way where you can see both how people could absolutely love Susan Sontag but also dislike her at the same time. She was a very honest, blunt person. She kind of told it how it is, which I think could be such an attribute to someone, but also can cause people to maybe not like you as much. So I found that really interesting. I think Susan Sontag also is a person who didn't believe in being feminine for femininity's sake. I think she really tried to portray herself as more masculine to be taken seriously as a writer. She kind of puts women down who try too hard, who put on makeup and dye their hair and dress really feminine. And she even says to Sigrid at one point, here's the big difference between you and me. You wear makeup and you dress in a certain way that's meant to draw attention and help people find you attractive. But I won't do anything to draw attention to my looks. If someone wants to, they can take a closer look and maybe they'll discover I'm attractive. But I'm not going to do anything to help them. Mine was the typical female way. Hers was the way of most men. There's another quote that she has in here from Susan that says, "It is harder for a woman," she acknowledged, meaning to be serious, to take herself seriously, to get others to take her seriously. She had put her foot down while still a child. Let gender get in the way? Not on your life. But most women were too timid. Most women were afraid to assert themselves, afraid of looking too smart, too ambitious, too confident. They were afraid of being unladylike. They did not want to be seen as hard or cold or self-centered or arrogant. They were afraid of looking masculine. Rule number 1 was to get over all that. And I just highly respect Susan Sontag for having that attitude. So I loved this, and it just made me want to read everything Susan Sontag has ever written. So highly, highly recommend. And last but not least, before I lose the light in here, is Dogs of Summer by Andrea Abreu. This was fantastic. I really loved this. I had gotten it for CJ Reed's Sunny's Book Truck Book Club. I did not finish it in time to join the chat, but I did finish it this month, and it was so, so good. It follows the story of 2 young 10-year-old girls and just their adventure over the summer and their friendship and the ebbs and flows of it. And it's just so incredibly relatable to female friendship in general and what you go through when you're a young person and doing things to impress your friends, to do things out of peer pressure, and just how important those friendships are when you're younger, especially at 10 or middle school or high school. I also thought the language that was used within this book was really unique, and you really felt the voices of these 2 girls come through. I felt like I could picture these girls in real life more than I could other characters from other books. And I thought that Julia Sanchez, who is the translator, she also did both of Eva Baltazar's books, Boulder and Permafrost, and she is just an incredible translator. This one especially, she chooses certain words that I'm sure are not exact translation, but really paints a picture for the personalities of these girls. Like they call their genitals their minkies, which I had never heard. I don't know if that is actual slang, but I thought it was an interesting choice. She also would write certain words in a phonetic way that had you pronounce them as those girls were pronouncing them, and really brought those characters to life in that way as well. There was one instance where it was Winnie the Pooh, but the way it was written was with, you read it almost with an accent. So I thought that was really creative, and I just felt so immersed in this story, in the atmosphere of Spain, in the heat of the summer. All of the descriptions were just incredibly vivid and visceral as well. Some of those experiences as a young girl, you really related to them through and through. So cannot recommend this one enough. It was a great book to end my month. I really, really loved it. So those are all the books. Thank you so much for watching. I'd love to hear what you read in September, and especially the things that you really loved, anything that you feel I need to read. And otherwise, I will catch you in the next one. Bye.